Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Peter, for that remarkable talk. Catarina Botello of the FAO told me a couple of weeks ago that he would give an amazing talk, and boy, was she right. Thanks again. So let's see. Let me make sure these are in order. Yes. So the FAO of the UN declared this year, 2015, the year of the soil. And it has been a remarkable year. More researchers than ever before are engaging with the research group here to advance the development of a perennial grain crop or further the understanding of how to grow mixtures of perennial species, or to figure out what it means for nature to be both a model and a measure for agriculture. In part, this is the case because the fundraising folk at the Land Institute have been amazingly successful at securing commitments for long-term funding. For example, the Malone Family Land Preservation Foundation has partnered with the Land Institute to form the Perennial Agriculture Project. The project funds many exciting initiatives that advance perennial agriculture, such as hiring a postdoc to help lead the global inventory that we will hear described at the end of this session by Dr. Allison Miller from St. Louis University. While it's reassuring to have some large sustained gifts committed to the Institute over the next 15 years, they will not pay all the bills. We still depend on modest gifts and grants for our bread and butter. Just saying, all right? At this time last year, we were enthusiastically anticipating a research meeting called New Routes for Ecological Intensification to be held at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. The meeting, which was sponsored by Melinda Merrill and the Estes Institute, did not disappoint, as we invited 50 scientists from over 10 countries to gather for close to a week in order to evaluate the status of a wide range of ongoing projects and to outline some manuscripts and chart the course of new research collaborations. In the research reports that will follow this morning, many of the new initiatives you will hear about were hatched or nurtured at this Estes Park meeting. The only strange thing about the meeting was it went right up to Halloween. And the Stanley attracts all sorts of crazies who are fascinated with the legacy of The Shining at this hotel. So just imagine what the bar looked like at night. If the Estes Park meeting was the starting line of this auspicious year, the finish line was marked with another scientific meeting, this one in Bamako, Mali, earlier this month, focusing on perennial grains in West Africa, with special attention to perennial sorghum, pigeon pea, and rice. More on that visit in a minute. In between Estes Park and Bamako was another year of work, largely iterative, often hot and tiring, sometimes frustrating, usually fascinating, towards a natural systems agriculture. And at this moment, if there are interns and technicians in the crowd of the Land Institute, if you could stand up. I know you're out there. They're probably filling holes with mulch. Yeah, let's give these guys a hand. Because they do a lot of the work. All right, lost my place. But what is a natural systems agriculture? Some of us who work here often take it for granted that this idea is actually intelligible to the public. But then we are reminded otherwise. This last week, the Wichita Eagle ran a full front-page story on Wes Jackson stepping down from the presidency of the Land Institute. The article went on to describe the work of this organization that the Wichita Eagle has been following, albeit at a distance of 100 miles or so, for close to 40 years. They quote, "They are developing how to coax substantial amounts of eatable, not edible, eatable grain from perennial prairie grasses where the ground doesn't have to be plowed or harrowed or saturated with weed killer every year." Now, this is not bad, but it's partial. It succeeds in explaining one dimension of a natural systems agriculture, and that's important. We're trying to coax, that is breed, perennial grasses to produce substantial amounts of eatable seed. It's true. But we're not only interested in perennial grasses. David will report on breeding broadleaf forbs, namely members of the aster or sunflower family. Where's David? There he is. For an oilseed crop. Moreover, the Land Institute is about to undertake a search for a plant breeder to work on one or more members of the legume family. The Wichita Eagle is also to be credited for alluding to a few of the positive environmental implications of a natural systems agriculture, not having to plow, harrow, or use weed killer. This list is actually much longer, but it does not really say what we are trying to create, but rather what we're trying to avoid. So I want to take a few minutes to describe a little more fully what we are trying to create and what we envision when we say natural systems agriculture, or NSA, not to be confused. To do this, I want to talk about playing music on a fiddle. To make music with a fiddle, you need strings, a bow, and the body of the instrument. To achieve a robust natural systems agriculture, you need a similar synergy or melding of elements. Perennial grains, the element that the Land Institute may be best known for at the moment, can be likened to the four strings of my natural systems agriculture fiddle, EADG. Right now, and for the last 10, maybe even 20,000 years, it turns out, humans have, with annual agriculture, been playing a fiddle with one string, producing just a fraction of the sound that a four-string fiddle can produce. Perennial crops do more than annual crops. They take up nutrients and water efficiently, they build organic matter, they protect the soil, and they do not have to be replanted every year, which saves a lot of work. Now granted, if you have a choice between a one-string fiddle and no fiddle at all, I think most of us would go along with the one-string version, like our ancestors have, especially if you were hungry for music. If the fiddle strings are the crop, then the bow is diversity. Crop diversity functions to suppress pest insects and disease, and diverse species can often use resources like sunlight, water, and nutrients more efficiently than single species. Farmers have traditionally deployed crop diversity on their farms, and it's really only recently that vast monocultures have gained prominence as fossil fuel-based inputs have taken the place of many functions of multiple species mixes or polycultures, such as pest suppression or nitrogen fixation. Agroecologists have been studying the role of diversity in farming systems for a while, but the types of interactions that can occur in perennial polycultures are often quite different than those that occur in annual polycultures. One of the papers that has been written and is about to be submitted for publication from the Estes Park meeting is focused on this very point, with Cornell professor Matt Ryan as the lead author. Okay, with four strings and a bow, we have a perennial polyculture, which is often what more informed people say we work on here. But of course, without the body of the fiddle, the strings and the bow are pretty useless. The body gives the fiddle its very form, indeed its sound. This is the rest of the ecosystem, and Peter spoke of this brilliantly. The glue that holds it all together, the weather, the rock, the soil organic matter, and the billions and billions of microbes, the food webs that co-inhabit the soil with the plant roots. So I realize that for some it may be challenging, if not ridiculous of a leap, to go from something as tactile as the body of a fiddle to something as amorphous as an ecosystem. So let me give you an example of the latter that draws from our recent trip to West Africa and underscores an area of research that received a lot of attention at the Estes Park meeting and is one that is on the active research agenda of some folks in this audience. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk at the Prairie Festival in which I described the soils of the Hawaiian archipelago going from quite young on the newest volcanic island, the Big Island, to quite old and weathered on the opposite end of the chain, the island of Kauai. The soils over much of Africa are similar to those in Kauai. They have not been rejuvenated by a recent volcano or rototilled by a glacier in a long time. I mean, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, it's more like Australia, which is similarly challenged, but has a fraction of the human population. So the soils in the part of Africa where Stan, Fiona, Andy, Wen-Chen, and I were inherently infertile when it came to rock-derived nutrients, phosphorus, calcium, zinc, potassium. But not only are many African soils infertile, most do not maintain very high levels of soil organic matter. This is mainly a function of high temperatures stimulating microbial breakdown of soil organic matter. So the native condition is one of relative infertility and low organic matter to begin with. Into that context, people have introduced the plow and the replacement of native perennial vegetation with annual crops. Plowing stimulates even greater microbial decomposition of soil organic matter, and changing out annuals for perennials results in lower plant allocation to roots below ground. Perennial species put much more of their productivity into roots and stuff that roots exude compared to annual crops. And that is predominantly what supplies the ingredients that turn into soil organic matter. Now, if a farmer could plow a soil like this and then walk away for 25 years to let it recover, a long-duration swidden or slash-and-burn agriculture, he or she might be able to maintain some level of productivity for quite some time. But as population pressures have increased and rotation time has decreased, and how population will continue to increase, many of these fragile soils have lost enough of their organic matter that they have essentially become unresponsive. In other words, if you amend them with fertilizers, you get almost no crop response because the ecosystem as a whole is broken. And loss of soil organic matter has been identified as the primary culprit. Soil organic matter helps maintain soil structure so that oxygen and rainfall can get in, carbon dioxide can get out, and organic matter provides the necessary food to feed the billions of microbes, the soil food web that we now know helps the plants grow. How do you build soil organic matter when there is little to no organic waste in the form of animal manure and plant residue to spare? Well, you could let it rest or fallow back into wild perennial vegetation, but that's not a popular option for folks that want to eat. What about the idea of planting perennial sorghum and pigeon pea and other crops that specialize in different ecosystem functions? What if the sorghum fixes nitrogen, as suggested by research carried out by Shiva Dhammaraju and his postdoc at the Land Institute? The pigeon pea we know fixes nitrogen, but just as important, appears to have the ability to go after phosphorus bound to iron, which is an extremely useful attribute in highly weathered soils. I think we're ready for co-creation. So hopefully this begins to give you an idea of the body of the fiddle, understanding what happens when we move an agroecosystem from a perpetually highly disturbed early stage of succession to a more functional later stage of succession vis-a-vis the planting of a perennial polyculture is of tremendous interest and importance. This is one of the areas we have focused on at TLI, and to greatly bolster this work, we are fortunate to have two celebrated researchers recently move from University of Indiana. Are they out there? Oh, they're way out there. Okay, but they can hear. Jim Beaver and Peggy Schultz are now living at the Perennial Agriculture Project site in Lawrence, and along with being KU faculty, will serve as research coordinators out there, and we're extremely happy to have them. Jim already has a postdoc laying out research plots to better understand the role that mycorrhizal fungi play in prairie ecosystems and how the role changes over succession. The implications of this work for natural systems agriculture here in Kansas, as well as West Africa, cannot be overstated. So I'm going to wrap it up. I can see the headline in the Wichita Eagle tomorrow morning. Land Institute researchers fiddle so that fiddlers in the future can fiddle like never before. Okay, that's what we're up to. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who are going to report on progress they've made this year, primarily crafting new fiddle strings. I'm going to invite Stan Cox up first, and he's going to coordinate brief reports from a well-represented perennial sorghum group that is with us this weekend. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.